Last month, the Texas State Board of Education discussed proposed changes to the state's social studies curriculum, igniting a national debate. Opponents of this change say this is history being rewritten from a political and ideological point of view. Proponents argue that it's time to even out our textbooks to reflect a better understanding of history and science. Add to that the fact that what Texas decides to teach influences what textbook publishers print and therefore what is taught in schools nationwide. Tonight, what is being changed in our students' curriculum? How much of this is political? And who should be deciding what is taught in our schools? I'm Ernie Manous, and this is Houston 8. Joining us tonight are Dr. Jack Christie, past chairman, State Board of Education; Debbie Pennington, past coordinator, Social Studies Curriculum for the Conroe Independent School District; and Sharon Pope, former president of both the Texas Council for the Social Studies and the Texas Social Studies Supervisors Association, currently editor of the Social Studies Texan, the official journal of the Texas Council for the Social Studies. Welcome to all of you for being here. A lot of people have heard in the news, have seen in the media, all of this about the change of what's going on in this curriculum. I want to take a little step further back and explain who is the Texas State Board of Education. We had written it out, and somebody said to us, well, people get confused. They think it's like your local Board of Ed. Dr. Christie, I'll start with you on that.
Well, it's had a vacillating history from an appointed state board in the 1800s to an elected board, back to an appointed board, and back to an elected board. And each time the voters are allowed to decide whether they want an elected or appointed board. And the districts, you have 15 members, and the districts are the size of 2 congressional districts. So you have to win the majority of votes in the size of 2 congressional districts. And then the voters have to make a wise choice, because that person affects over 4 million public school students in the state of Texas. So it's a very important vote, and I hope the voters research it every time there's an election for the State Board of Education. To quote a good Houstonian, George Strait Jr., he said, next to the governor, lieutenant governor, your next most important vote is the member of the State Board of Education.
I had read somewhere that this actually came out of the influence that's happening right now on the Board of Ed came out back when Pat Robertson had been running for president, and the president, he didn't get the nomination, that he said, we need to influence our communities by getting on the school boards. That's where it's most important for people to be heard.
Yes.
All the attention right now is on this curriculum change, and I've heard it said every 10 years. I've heard somebody else say it isn't a set time when this happens. Outside of these 10 years, what does the board do then? When they're not reviewing and changing the curriculum, what is it that they do?
Well, they pretty much do the policies that oversee the 4.7 million children in the public schools. You select a commissioner of education, and then one other important thing is you oversee approximately $24 billion of the children's money. Set aside in, again, the 1800s, a few $1 million and some land that just happened to pop up with oil rigs and gas rigs, and so it's been taken care of for many years, and it was devoted, the profits from that devoted to the children of Texas for their textbooks, for their now their software and hardware, and so that's a big deal, overseeing that investment for the children of Texas, but mostly to guide and hold accountable school districts and classrooms to progress in education in Texas.
Okay, Sharon, let me come over to you and say, now all this attention is the social studies curriculum, and the school board has gathered, the state school board has gathered to decide what should be taught in the curriculum for the next 10 years. How do they get this input? How do they decide? I mean, our board, as I understand it, comes from all walks of life. They are not necessarily educators. They are people that are elected as politicians. So how does this come together then?
This is one of their most important responsibilities, and they will say and have said that these are their curriculum documents. This is their process. And they have articulated steps by which the curriculum will be developed under their oversight. According to the process that they themselves enacted, the curriculum document should be initially written by review committees, writing teams, which they appoint. Debbie was a member of one of the most important of those teams. They then approve through open debate and amendment the documents that these writing teams have written. That is after the writing teams have heard from expert reviewers who are appointed by the board to look at the current documents and make recommendations for changes. The process on paper should work very smoothly and should really not be as political as it has become, but we can't take politics out of it.
Yeah, I'm going to jump over to Debbie for a second here and say,
please.
So you get together and over a course of a year, you go through the old curriculum and then make suggestions, changes, alterations in it, or do you folks write a fresh curriculum?
We do look at the existing standards because our responsibility was to revise. We were not asked and assigned to start from scratch. And we would look at the existing ones, and over time, some things have changed, and we needed to clarify. We need to make sure that what we were teaching the students was grade appropriate. It was appropriate for their learning, and it was going to be something that, remember, this is not the curriculum. This is not the lessons. This is not the day-to-day. These are the standards, and the standards have to be measurable. So what you put in writing has to be something that can be easily understood.
Explain a little bit more what you mean by that so that the audience follows exactly what you're talking about.
What we're looking at in education, it's very important today, is that what we teach students is something that they walk away with having long-term memory, something that they will be able to use and apply. And in some ways, we measure whether or not they learned that by assessments. And probably the most common one that people are familiar with are the TAKS testing and, of course, assessments. But there are multiple ways to assess whether or not a student has achieved that learning. So how the standard is written is going to determine whether or not it's a name they have to remember or it's a concept of change over time that they need to be able to apply to other pieces of evidence or other historical events.
And I don't mean to belabor the point, but I just want to clarify it so that even I understand it. What then is being approved, and any of you feel free to jump in and help me understand this, is a principle or a name or an important event is listed in what you folks are doing, and then it's up to the teachers in the classrooms and their school boards independently or their districts independently to create the lesson plans for it? Or is it, what exactly is the difference here?
It would be. This is the standard that says the student will understand a certain concept or understand the impact of the year 1900 or the past election. And it's going to be up to the school district to create that curriculum, the teacher to create the lesson plan, to decide how the impact of that year will be taught so that students will not only understand what happened, the change that occurred because of that event, and then they also will choose the way to assess whether or not the student is actually going to remember what was being taught.
Okay, so then all the big hoopla that's going on right now is because when the State Board of Education came together, and I guess it started at the end of last year and has been going on, and that they had big votes and movement and plans that happened, but the final vote is coming in May, so we still have time to get involved in this process. But it was decided that some things were relevant, some things weren't. Is that what the problem is here?
Ideally, this should be a broad framework. It should not be a laundry list of dates and people and events. That should come more at the local decision-making level, even the local teacher. The lesson plan should not be the focus at the state level. It should be the broad standards and framework on which curriculum would be based and then individual lesson plans. What those of us in the area of supervision of teachers and teachers themselves, what we were hoping for was to maintain this big, broad framework without a long list of specific people. There are, I've heard estimates as many as 400 names now that are expected to be understood by students. And this then becomes everybody's nightmare of why they, quote, didn't like history. It's just a long list of names and dates. We would hope that we could get back to something a little broader so that then ultimately instructional materials, i.e. textbooks, could be developed. Many of us are concerned that the board now is really making that list for the textbook publishers, is saying we want all of these items included rather than these are the broad ideas that should be the focus.
Dr.
And
Christie.
it should be grade level approval.
Well, let me jump in here and ask Dr. Christie. So is this something new? What has caused this change?
No, I think the monumental shift as far as the importance of Texas in this curriculum writing is in the 90s, we had 600 experts, from parents to teachers to people that walked on the moon to president of Rice University, come together at NASA and say, how do we compete in the next century? We're in the 90s, we're going to the next century. How do we compete? What standards do we need in these 15 subject areas to compete with the Far East, with Europe, anywhere in the world? High-class standards for high school education. 600 people, 25,000 pieces of input from individuals, emails, faxes, presentations at the board. What do they need to compete in tomorrow's world? And in the 15 subject areas, we raised the standards. With the help of the business community, we had an accountability system that tested it to where the high school diploma meant something if they could pass the minimum standards and such. And to give the teachers credit, they raised to those standards. Yes, we can bring the children to that level. And they did, and they got accolades throughout the nation, Texas and North Carolina, for achievements.
How detailed was this curriculum compared to what's happening today?
Very similar. Very similar. It just takes an 8-10-year cycle, whether it's health textbooks and the controversies there, social studies textbooks and the controversies there. It comes about every 8 or 10 years. You know, and I tried to push that if we went to a laptop base, then you could update it every year instead of waiting for a textbook that had the last president as George Bush 41. Mm-hmm. You know, we have to update to keep these children current, and the technology is there to do that. But it's a very similar cycle.
Okay, I'm throwing this out to all of you. Any of you jump on it that want. Okay, there's so much information out there. Some stuff's going to get in, some isn't. We're going to have to make these value judgments at every move we make. This is the group that's in position right now. This is the decisions they've made. Ultimately, they're all important people we're talking about. What's the big hoopla?
I would say that sitting at the writing committees, and I was with the U.S. History, we had excellent representation with teachers. We looked at every single item that was on the list. We looked and considered everything that was told to us by the State Board, as well as every expert and every single piece of communication that TEA had received. We evaluated that, and we looked at its appropriateness. Is this an appropriate piece of information for a 16-year-old to learn? How deep can they get, and how much do we expect them to walk away with? And I think that they did that at every single grade level. I think they took it with the amount of time you have to teach it, and they considered that. They really tried to put something into play that considered everybody's point of view.
So at that point then when all this information, what you've compiled, goes back to the State Board, they can just decide whether or not they want to include it or not include it. I mean, we hear people have different, there's a newspaper publisher, there's a dentist, there's different walks of life. They can just...
Yeah, this is where it becomes political.
Yes.
Okay.
Fortunate or unfortunate, it's where it becomes political. And that's why a person's vote on who you put in that decision-making process is paramount in your voting process, because it has become very political. It was in the 90s, and it is now. And so you have to study where they're coming from. And, it all comes down. You can't be an expert in all these areas. You've got to listen to the experts, and the people appointed to these review panels are good people. They go to church. They want the best for their children. They're to be trusted instead of they're the enemy, we're smarter than they are, let's put in the political process our viewpoints. That's where the battle is right now.
Is there a way to stop that? Is there a way, if it's an elected board, is this always going to be the problem we're facing? And even if the governor is appointing, once again, we're in the political arena. How do you make sure that the children are getting the best, and I'm not making a value judgment on what was put in or not put in here, but simply in generic terms, how do we always know that our children are getting the best education? What can we do to reform this kind of a system?
There isn't an easy answer at that point. I believe that what Dr. Christie said is exactly right. In the 90s, the process that was used for the development of the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, which is what we're revising and refining now, was very inclusive. A lot of people were involved, a lot of people from across Texas and different communities. So there was much more input with a variety of opinions. Right now, in the last 3 years with English language arts, science, and social studies, there were fewer people involved with the actual writing of the documents, budgetary constraints being a problem, but there was just not as much input from across the state of Texas. In this case, there was even less. There was less representation from across the state on the writing teams, but the people who were there spoke well for all of Texas. We were very proud of the work they did. But at this point, it does become political, and we can only hope that those people who are in these elected positions will listen to everyone. We're not sure they are listening to everyone now, and we have till May to see how open their ears are to those of us who think this is not the way to write good standards, to include so many details that children can't possibly learn this much information in 1 year and then be assessed on it. Yeah. It's just not good curriculum writing.
And I think the feedback that we were getting was not political. The emails that we received, the phone calls, the messages, and even what you look at in the newspapers, those letters to the editor are not political in nature, but what's happening on the board is. Texans are saying we want really quality standards for our students. We want them to have a good curriculum, and that's where the politics comes in, that we've got the public support, we've got a good set of information out there.
Now, currently there is underway the national curriculum, but Texas has decided not to sign on to it, is just not going to be part of it. How does that play in?
Well, I think that shows you the difference between the politics in Austin and the politics in Washington, D.C., because if you go back, and I believe that the classrooms and the teachers raising the standards in the classrooms put a person in the White House. That president tried to take No Child Left Behind that worked in Texas. It was bipartisan. And if you think about the concept, we're not giving up on one child. We're giving them a quality high school education and just not settle for anything less. It didn't work in Washington, D.C. There wasn't bipartisan support. It just didn't work. Now, the problem now is these are our tax dollars that go to Washington, D.C., and they offer them back to the state, which Texas should accept the funds that, those are our tax dollars to utilize to improve education. But what they don't know, and what we did in the 90s, we dealt with the Department of Education and says, we'd like to do it the Texas way. Give us the money, because it was $50 million at that time. It's more now. Don't turn down that money. I mean, the kids need it in the classrooms. The teachers need it for salaries. But you can work with them as far as we had in the health textbooks. We wanted $30 million there from CDC. And we said, could we do an abstinence-based curriculum for our Texas schools? Yeah, I guess you can. You'll have a waiver for that and you get the money. So instead of just turning it down, boy, I'd like my own tax dollars back in the Texas classroom.
But for people to understand then, so there is a movement to have a national curriculum, or is there actually one in place at this point? Do we know where we're at with the...
Governors have embraced this idea. Many governors have. And in English language arts and mathematics, there would appear to be more support nationwide. And In social studies, we're always the last to get anything because everybody says, well, you know, we have history. It's not a problem. There are history standards within the English language arts in this proposed national curriculum. Only 2 states didn't sign off on it. And, you know, in Texas, we do think we can do things better. And it's probably the case. We have good standards in place right now. As a matter of fact, in social studies, we were hoping we could just keep what we have right now and just tweak them. They are very good. But people in other states have copied our standards. We've done a good job. There's a feeling in Texas that we like homegrown stuff. So I believe that's pretty much the sentiment.
Okay,
Dr.
so then let me...
Our standards are higher than what's
They are.
national.
Okay, so let me take, though, and follow this through. So if the national standards is being put together for most of the states, but Texas, because of our size and the amount of our students and all of that, when we decide a curriculum, 47 other states are going to be buying their same textbooks from where we're doing what we're putting in our textbooks, and the textbook publishers are going to follow our lead because they want us to buy their textbooks. So in a sense, there is a national standard and there is the Texas standard. Do they come at odds with each other then? Is there a battle in that? Are we kind of saying, well, I don't know, I'll just leave it out at that point?
There's a lot of talk about this now, and one of the articles that appeared this week talked about the myth of the Texas strength in textbooks. And we don't really know whether Texas is going to have any textbooks. It really is a very uncertain thing. The governor yesterday our governor called for electronic textbooks. And, you know, the whole publishing industry is changing. The way we access information as individuals, let alone as school children, is changing. But something is going to have to be done to develop the materials that would be delivered electronically. I mean, the development is the cost for creating textbooks, whether they are in print form or electronic. So there's a lot of money involved. But there also is the technology of textbook development now. Textbooks can be customized more easily now than they ever could be in the past. So I tell my friends in other states, don't worry. If you don't like what we have in Texas, you're going to have your own version. Don't worry about it so much, but it still is an economic factor.
Before we run out of time, I know a lot of our audience, and I know this is really what they wanted us to talk about, and we've kind of gone into the more philosophical discussion of this topic, but what actually is being left out and what's put in, and what everyone always hears, and all of my friends from out of state are, you're taking Thomas Jefferson out of the textbooks? Can somebody please explain what's going on with Thomas Jefferson? Okay, it's over to you, Sharon.
All right. Thomas Jefferson, my family is known as TJ, so we're going to... Dear friends. We're dear friends. Thomas Jefferson, President of the United States, is in the U.S. history TEKS at the appropriate levels, so he is not left out of any proposed document. The vote in March was to remove him from a world history standard, so that has become a very contentious issue, whether or not his influence on political philosophies around the world should have been removed, and there's strong feeling among many that it should not have been. I think he'll be put back in the final vote. I hope so.
Yeah. When you mentioned,
But Ernie, the underlying thing there, and she's not talking about the political aspect of it. They have a problem with Jefferson's church and state separation, and that's maybe a one-vote majority on the board that have that. And you know, it's astounding that it gets so petty there, because the curriculum before and the curriculum presented in the classroom today by good teachers, they can be symbiotic as far as the idea of church and state, and without promoting one religion, but you know, I think that there can be a symbiotic relationship and not just make it political for the benefit of the child,
right,
not their own personal strict philosophies.
I know time is running out and we're trying to get through as much as we can. Let me quickly ask then the question about one person commented walking out of the board meeting that, you know, we're just trying to rewrite our history as all white. Is this happening? Is there an area where people are feeling like minority groups or less popular groups are being represented fairly?
I would tell you that we spent countless hours making sure that we did a fair representation. And one of the biggest issues came with civil rights. And we started listing, and people were saying, well, you have to have the certain number of this group, and you have to have the other. And we felt like we really came back with to be able to compare and contrast, because it's not our job to teach children what they are supposed to believe. We are supposed to teach them how to think so that they can learn how to process these things for themselves.
Before I run out of time, I'm just going to jump on you right here to go to Dr. Christie real fast just to finish. Mid-May, there is a final vote. What can we do, our audience do, to influence it, be part of it? What happens at this point?
Gee, that's a tough one. It's a political maneuver. And so the voters of this state need to let those 15 members know what their feelings are.
And that's the Texas State Board of Education.
That's exactly right. Unless political maneuver can put that off till a January vote, which you have a few elections that change to a little more balanced viewpoint on the state board.
Sharon is championing the bit. They're telling me I have to wrap, so in a second or two.
Okay. The current documents are going to be posted for public input by April 16th, and people have 30 days to give their ideas about specific wording and language. Please do.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much for coming in. This conversation went longer than we thought, so we're out of time. That does it for us tonight. Until next time, I'm Ernie Manous. Thank you for joining us. Have a great week.